Hello, my name is Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers to be precise, and I want to introduce you to a string of structures in a workshop I like to call the Wicked Question Kata. It was developed in collaboration with my partner in crime, Maiia. Um, Hang out with her, track her down on LinkedIn as she explores lean agility and all things that intersect with Management 3.0 jazz thrown in there as well. A couple notes about our context. This workshop it was designed to take advantage of the affordances of Microsoft Team and to deal with its limitations at the same time. It was a 90-minute workshop that we ran every 3 sprints as part of a sort of overall retro structure. And we were lucky enough to have representatives from all development teams and a very wide swath of the organization participate. This was in a company of about 100 people, so it worked pretty well, and I want to share it with you. To give you a little background about where this idea of kata comes from and the inspiration for this workshop, this comes from the improvement kata that was observed by Mike Ruther over at Toyota back, I believe, in the turn of the century. That you can see has this general structure of getting a grips on the overall direction, grasping the current situation and challenges, figuring out where you want to be in the next increment of time, and conducting experiments in order to course correct your way in the line of this bigger direction and challenge. This was accompanied with this coaching kata, which you can also see makes a specific reference and sort of expands on the current situation by taking special note of the obstacles along your way there. And I want to shout out this aspect as well, that you'll often work on these same obstacles over several plan, do, check, act cycles, meaning that again, you won't actually know what the result of your experiment will be, so you want to do many of them to learn as you go and figure stuff out. So we worked in the intersection of lean and agile in the software development process, and at some point this kata turned into this canvas, and Maiia was awesome enough to introduce this to me. And you can take note that there's a couple differences between the kata and this canvas itself. This idea of direction and challenge sort of got fused together in this first cell. This idea about the definition of awesome, I guess that's our target direction, became this new phrasing. Then we, of course, would work to the next state that we would get to in an increment of time and think again about the first steps that we would take. This particular canvas come to me via the Liberators, Barry and Christian. It was developed by Tea, and if you'd like, you can download it at shop.theliberators.com. So for our purposes, we would always assume that we'd show up 10 minutes late, just because that seems how groups work. And then we'd really focus on giving people a high-level overview of this structure, now, problem, definition of awesome, next target condition, and the first steps associated with it. And really kick things off trying to be as explicit as we could that we were here to explore our greatest challenges around the topic du jour and to prototype solutions to those challenges. Our first step in that process revolved around the liberating structure Wicked Questions. And we would start with the invitation of what are the qualities and characteristics that you, the market, and stakeholders want and need teams to be so that we can take over the planet. The same thing we do every night, brain. We would make use of the chat in a sort of popcorn style in a 2-minute time box in order to generate a list of qualities that were recognized to be desirable. And then to explain the heart of the wicked question, which is this paradox. How is it that we are A, both A and Z at the same time, what I would do is I would just define a few wicked questions to to give an example of sort of how that looks and what it feels like. And then we would use, just like according to the liberating structure, a few more wicked questions that were sort of crowdsourced from the group. At which point we would use the React or emoji function in Microsoft Teams to give each individual one vote per person on which wicked question they thought was the most relevant right now. And then digging deeper into especially this challenge or what we want to stop doing, we would ask people to reflect on what are the behaviors, attitude, and restraining forces that keep us stuck in an either or aspect of this wicked question. So instead of doing both at the same time, that keep us stuck in this either or polarity. And then we would give folks 3 votes per person. And this was really more of an opportunity to figure out whose voices or which aspects were most salient. We would sort of give the microphone over to the highest voted 3 behaviors, attitude, and restraining forces, so we could get some more diverse voices heard in this large group setting. And again, we ran this workshop in 90 minutes. If you had more time, an alternative structure would be to use something along the lines of Triz, especially as we're thinking about things we want to stop doing. It's a really great structure. And an invitation that we had planned to use there was, as a social scientist studying human behavior, our research goal is to create a working environment that is so toxic that we can get neither A nor Z. List all of the things you could do to create this hellish company culture. And so once more, that would make use of the chat. And then we would go through and ask folks, all right, so which actions do we, in even small ways, currently do that we would, again, be better off stopping? And then to offer folks the invite to, again, use the emoji or vote icon, react icon, and 3 votes per person to come to a short list of qualities that, again, we want to stop those specific challenges. Our next step was this definition of awesome. And we always figured that it was good to be somewhat emotional and a little bit loose with this idea of our desired future state, but again, to give ourselves this sentiment of direction. So we would imagine an environment where the driving forces to do both A and Z at once were overwhelming, that it was just automatic. And ask folks to reflect on what do they notice, do, and feel in this place where the wicked question is a foregone conclusion. We do that every day. Again, making use of the chat, giving folks 3 votes per person, and giving the microphone over to the top 3 voted items gave us this sort of heat map of excitement and anticipation. And this we would sort of breeze through in about 10 minutes. In order to get to this next or target condition, we would reinforce the wicked question and invoke the restraining forces that we brought up from the first step. So we would ask folks to split into breakout groups of about 4 and to reflect on this invitation that 6 weeks from now, what has changed? In what ways are we able to reduce those restraining forces by just 15% as a nod to 15% solutions? And in these breakout groups, we would ask folks to give us their output of their conversation in a very specific form. And that is, we believe that in 6 weeks, and we are right if ... So this is also a nod to OKRs. You might take note that we're defining what do we want, and we're asking ourselves to reflect on how we will know that we have gotten there. And then we would ask groups to come back in and to share their desired next target condition. Then digging into next steps, we would keep people in the same groups, and in between those two previous sentences for their output, we would have them add on to that to verify that we will and measure. So this would leave us with a statement or a falsifiable hypothesis that goes as, we believe that ... To verify that, we will ... and measure ... And if we are right ... So that statement again is a falsifiable hypothesis, also known as a test or an experiment. And then again, inviting groups to brainstorm as many experiments as they could within their time box, and for each experiment to have those first 3 steps that it would take in order to run the experiment. At which case, we would have the group come and copy and paste this specific format of their experiment into the chat. More often than not, groups would have 1, maybe 2 different experiments that a couple people in the group were particularly excited about. And if we needed to sort of prioritize our time and attention and vote, if we were, for example, in a culture hackathon where we're all sort of invited to participate in this limited subset of experiments, what we would ask folks is that if you had half a day to spend on just one of these experiments, which would it be? And again, using that emoji or respond function in Teams, we would use the heart as a vote to indicate that. And then we would also ask folks, now, if you think that this is an awesome idea and somebody should do it, but you're not particularly interested in doing it yourself, then give that item a thumbs up. And after this sort of positive voting, we would also ask folks to go, for every experiment that makes you nervous, that you have serious doubts or feelings or fears about, vote with the surprise response, again in Teams. And these 3 ways would give us an opportunity to sort of explore minority perspectives, especially in this last step, so that we could figure out, all right, this is the one we should probably do. This is the one that people are more interested in committing to, and what information could we look for in this minority perspective to tell us what we should consider and watch out for. And then, of course, wrapping sort of up, we'd ask everyone, all right, so given these experiments, who else do we think should be involved? And that would take place as sort of a round-robin group discussion. Again, for this particular canvas, you can download it at shop.theliberators.com. We never ever got to this additional step, but it was always on our agenda should we have time. Since we've invoked this wicked question and we have spent so much time talking about and brainstorming solutions to the challenge, we also wanted to give space to this sense of positivity and surface what was good practice in the face of this challenge. So if we refer to this wicked question that we started with, how is it that we are both A and Z at the same time? What situations, examples, and areas are we able to do both well? And then in once more a sort of open dialogue, what are the behaviors and practices that make it possible to do both well in that context? And to invite participants to take those practices back to their teams again, because we had representatives from across the organization, to take these good practices back to their local context and to share what they have learned. Try this stuff out and see if it doesn't help you deal with this challenge that we all seem to be facing. So this improvement canvas, as you can see, we've done what I really am excited to do, to give form and structure to this very digestible tool that helps structure not only the process, but also the output of the process into a very legible form. A lot of thoughts and a lot of different sort of elements have gone into the way that we design this workshop. Obviously taking advantage of wicked questions and Triz, with a lot of additional structures that sort of come from this idea of strategy not working that we think would work very well in this context. Building in this idea of a, pardon me, of a Lewin force field analysis to get both the driving forces that will help us get to the outcome we want, as well as exploring explicitly the restraining forces. Again, what do we want more of? What do we want less of in our context? Using this test card explicitly from Strategizer to call out and reference these restraining forces and to address them, and forming, again, this falsifiable hypothesis and landing in discovery action dialogue. Again, coming back to the initial improvement kata and improvement coaching, the coaching kata, this is a process that we would repeat in frequent cycles, paired with this observation of how we did in terms of these initial experiments to, again, make explicit the learning process. When we think about experimentation, right, we often think about, let me run an experiment and then test it out and see how it goes, which I think is great generally. You should be learning in the process of doing as much as humanly possible. I think running one experiment at a time, it has value, but as a much more limited value. I mean, my thoughts on this are already on the record with that video I made about the culture hackathon. I believe we should be running as many experiments, as many tests in parallel as possible. And I think that in order to make that effective, you should be abandoning experiments as well that don't prove particularly successful. So learn from them for sure. But if you can take note that this idea that we had just doesn't seem to be getting traction, it's like pulling a dead horse, absolutely figure a way to pivot towards something else, another experiment, and scale up what is proving more successful, and enable a sort of evolutionary force to influence which experiments you invest the most energy in. Basically, let the most adaptive experiments sort of live and continue, and reallocate the resources from those less adaptive experiments towards those more adaptive experiments, so that we can, again, like I say, allow an evolutionary force to take over experimentation. I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth saying. At any rate, this has been our Wicked Questions Kata. Thanks so much for your time, attention, and energy. I'm particularly interested in two reflections from you as you think about this string of structures. First question is, what do you think this structure and this string enabled? What did it make possible? The second reflection is, what do you think that this string or structure prevented and kept from rearing its head? And of course, where do you think you might be able to apply something like this? Of course, tooled and redesigned for your tools and your context. But where do you think you could make use of this idea of this continuous improvement kata, this Wicked Questions kata? Shit. Oops, there we go. We're back. No problem. Again, my name is Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers. Thanks for your time, attention, and energy, and good luck out there. Cushious.